All right, everybody, here we are on the Mind Body Marathon podcast, the show that'll help you towards better health. I'm your host, Dr. Leo, and here today, my guest is Ryan Adams. And Ryan is a professional middle distance runner. And so Ryan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I'm originally from Northeast Ohio. I grew up in Hudson, but I did not go to Hudson. I went to CVCA. During my time there, I was a 5-time state champ.
I didn't know you were 5 times.
Yeah.
What events?
4x8. That was actually the earliest one. Was I anchored the 4x8 my sophomore year, and then junior year we defended 4x8, 16, 8, and then my senior year I just stuck with the 16, which I ended up breaking the Division II state record at the time, which was the oldest one in the books.
Yeah. Scott Fry.
Yeah. I think he still holds the 3200. So
impressive runner. And cross.
He still has cross?
I think he still holds cross too. Yeah.
Well, that was a big achievement
No, it's a huge achievement.
I was stoked. And plus that kind of paid my way to college. So, hard 4 minutes and some odd seconds to get there, but absolutely worth it.
It's a great investment right there.
Oh yeah. I mean, my parents were happy. They're like,
so yeah, about that, where'd you go to college?
Yeah, I went to Furman University. For those of you who don't know, it's a small Division I school in South Carolina, Greenville. So that's upstate, not too far away from North Carolina. So, and one of the things that brought me there was actually my current coach in Baltimore, and we'll get there, I kind of get ahead of myself, was on the professional team that was there, Furman Elite, coached by my college coach, Robert Gary. So Corey was there, and he was my cross-country camp counselor when I was going to NEO cross-country camp. And kind of that was one of the biggest catalysts in being like, okay, you know what, I'll look at Furman. Corey's there. He's an Ohio legend.
Yeah.
So ended up signing, stayed there for 6 years. Thank you, COVID, for extending my undergrad by another 2 years or an extra year. But I was there for 6 years. I was a 6-time All-American in once in cross, twice in indoor, and in the mile and the 3K, and then 3 times outdoor in the 15.
Man, that is awesome. And so when you left Furman, when you graduated, what did you end up doing?
I signed my first professional contract with Atlanta Track Club. Okay. So I was there for about roughly a year and a half, a little over. And then actually didn't compete for about that entire time. At some point you get injured. You have things go wrong. I had things going pretty smoothly for a good 10 years. And then at some point it was just like, all right, well, you got to pay the piper. And it was just my turn. So, disappointing, but at the same time, valuable experiences that I took and still ran away with. So,
yeah. So then now you're with who?
Under Armour Mission Run Baltimore. And actually for a brief stint, I was unsponsored living in Mexico. So
it sounds so exotic.
Yeah, right. I know it's Mexico City, so not, there were palm trees, but also a lot of smog, a lot of traffic.
Okay. So what's the connection with Mexico?
Yeah. So, my mom is from Mexico. She came to the States sometime in the 80s, met my dad. So because of that, like all my mom's side of the family is there. I grew up going down there summers, just on random vacations. I'm not that old, but old enough to remember, what security was like before 9/11. And compare like, oh man, it used to be a lot easier.
Right.
But yeah, so since then, just have always loved going down there to visit, and yeah.
Huh. And so you're trying to compete for them?
Yes. Yeah. So that's another thing is that
you're going to run under the Mexican flag.
Ideally. Yeah.
Which is hilarious, right? Because you have the most non-Mexican name of all time.
I mean, like, just think of a WASP name, like, and actually not even that, probably just the whitest name you can imagine.
Yes.
Ryan Adams. Which is why, like, I changed my Instagram handle to Ryan Adams Fernandez, because I'm like, people gotta know that it's legit. That I'm not just making this up. So like, I do carry around like one of my ID cards with me just in case people are like, no, you're capping. Like, that's not true. You're Mexican. I'm like, and
that's hilarious.
It's funny though, because with I've gotten to know some of the guys. Another guy that recently made the switches, Lalo Herrera, who's out at the Under Armour group in Flagstaff, but he went to UC Boulder. Mm-hmm. He switched around the same time, and we were talking, and he's like, dude, you stand out. You stand out. And I'm like, name. He's like, name, skin, your eyes, dude.
Yeah.
Like, it's like blue eyes. No one has those. And I'm like, man, I gotta wear sunglasses.
Yeah, that is hilarious. Yeah. So, well, that's a great. I mean, I think earlier when we were okay, so you're in Baltimore,
Mm.
and you were at you were at Atlanta Track Club there for a minute. So tell me a little bit about what kind of sidetracked you in Atlanta Track Club. Like, what was was it injuries? Was it just kind of wrong training environment? What was going on there?
It was, how do I say it? It was kind of everything.
Yeah.
I look back at Atlanta, and I'm super appreciative of having my first opportunity given to me. I'm appreciative of everyone that was there. I loved my teammates. I love my coaches, Amy and Andrew Begley, who have moved on to other things. They're actually both in Indianapolis now, coaching a small group out there. But I think really what it was is I can look at ways where, yeah, maybe the training wasn't right, the environment wasn't right. I think I'm a small town kind of guy. I grew up in Hudson. Like, the biggest city I was used to was Cleveland, going there for tribe games or something like that.
Yeah.
Greenville is a small city, probably akin to Akron. So going to Atlanta was just my first time in this major city on my own. And I did like it in some ways, but there was just a lot of ways where I was like, it's so busy. Like, traffic is terrible.
Yeah. That's an understatement.
Yeah. I unless you live there, like, the only other city I can really be like, yeah, you got room to talk is LA. The only other American city. Mexico City is also terrible traffic, so different kind of terrible. But I can look back objectively and be like, wow, there was some things wrong. I know one of the biggest components was my own relationship with running and my mindset, where running was this end all be all. It's where I drew all of my value and worth. And I had, like I had said before, I'd never been injured in high school or college beyond missing. I think the most I ever missed was 2 or 3 weeks. And, that was mixing up cross training with some land and some alter G. So never even like fully off because of an injury. So this was my first time where I had an injury and I missed not just a race, but a season. And I'd never missed a season before that indoor 2022. So I think when you draw all that value and worth from that one thing, and then that's taken away from you for whatever reason, I'm sure part of it was training. I was also in a pretty bad car accident in November of 22.
Yes, you were.
And thank goodness, it wasn't anything severe in terms of injury, but with professional running, your body is kind of like a fine-tuned microchip that anything that upsets that balance just can throw the entire system in the whack.
Well, you're working at such a high level. That's part of it, is that, you're redlining and training, you're redlining with your volume, your intensity, and then you throw a car accident in there.
Yeah.
And it's like that instantly changes the variables of work.
Well, not only that, but like, instead of responding to that in like a, let's be moderate, and I did immediately contact our medical team, and we got x-rays, concussion tests, all the basic protocol. But rather than kind of being like, maybe let's back off a little bit, I proceeded to, a week later, run a sub 4 time trial. And a week after that, I won the Cleveland Turkey Trot in a PR 5-mile race. So rather than stepping on the brakes, I was like, all right, like, let's hit like all gas, no brakes. Like, let's come off of this and really bounce off this serious collision. And I look back in hindsight and I'm like, oh, that's so dumb.
Yeah. So what ended up coming out of that? So did you end up so it's like right after all those races that you started to have the injuries, right?
So that Cleveland race, I mean, like, honestly, of all the things, probably what did me a little more, it was 40 and rainy. I mean, like, just such a poor decision on my part. Like, I probably should have known better at that point.
But it's like classic Midwesterner. It's always like, there's something about living in the Midwest and going ham on these Turkey Day races and just getting after it. I don't know why it's a thing, but I would do that too.
Yeah. Like, and it just feels good to just hit a race hard like that, especially in off distance where it's like, check out my range. And pride goeth before the fall, and definitely went before the fall, because after that, I remember even the day after, I was like, oh, hips feel a little off. It was cold yesterday. It was a hard effort. And then progressively over the next couple of weeks, I was like, things are feeling just weird. And I remember we went to club nats in I want to say they were in Tallahassee that year, and 10K, and I was just like, all right, you know what? I'm not feeling awesome, but I can always get out of a cross country race. Especially, I just ran a great 5-mile race, and probably the worst thing you can do when you're having like these hip and back issues is run a race on off terrain, because there's just no stability. And while I could handle the roads and probably the pounding wasn't great, getting somewhere where every footstep is just your ankles are rolling, you're forcing all the stability muscles to activate. And like I really started noticing that during that race where I was like, something is off. And it did not go great. I want to say for the record, I had hung up my cross country spikes literally in Terre Haute in 2019. So coming back in 2021 to race another cross country race was the last thing I ever wanted to do. It, for other reasons to turn out not to go so well. I had a better cross country race last fall, but still not my preferred distance or venue.
Yeah, well, that's so going back to what you said earlier about your mindset with running, and having it sort of be the end all be all. Has that changed? Have you adapted with that, and kind of how you fought through some of those early demons?
Yeah, slowly. When you've thought one way for a long time, it's hard to just, it's like a ship. Like it's hard to turn the ship. But I'd say at this point, after the past year and a half or so, because that was around the time where things were just really bad. I mean, like just for full context, running was going poorly. I broke up with my ex-girlfriend. My cat died a week later.
Oh my jeez.
At the time, I was dealing with chronic illness and fatigue. I had cluster headaches for the first time in years. So just it seemed like everything was going wrong.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why I left Atlanta was to right that ship and to figure out, okay, this current trajectory just isn't working for me. So throughout the past year and a half or so, it really has been intentionally looking at like, okay, well, why did things turn out the way they did? And, one of the things I came to was, man, I just put all my stock in this one thing. And even times where I've been most successful at running, but even more importantly, more satisfied with life, it's been when running hasn't been that number one.
Yeah.
And I think after years of thinking that way of like running is number one, it's taken time to realize there are other venues in life that create satisfaction, that you can have success in, that create satisfaction. That doesn't mean that you have to give up running and you have to give up training at a high level entirely. But and even doing so, even doing these other things can even help with running, keeping you having that work-life balance, especially when you're, professional runner. It's work. Yeah. So if everything is running, it's the same thing as someone having their work be their entire life.
Yeah.
Their life is just going to start to unravel because you can't have just one thing.
Right. And that's an important point. And I think a great factor in understanding how to perform better. And one of the mental and biohacks is just not becoming obsessive about any certain thing, and just kind of running and fitness and being active and, like you said, work and any component of your life. It's just all meant to work in concert with each other, and any one variable shouldn't be overextended over the others. In my career, I always ran best when I was super focused on school and really driven with work, and then running was just sort of an afterthought. My coach used to always say, like, don't squeeze, don't want it too much. And the moments that you want it too much, then it's like, then those are the moments that you really ultimately are you're not firing on all cylinders. Your brain is becoming hyper obsessed with it.
Yeah. No, I think like one thing, not just being runners, but like you alluded to before, Midwestern runners at that, is that like toughness. It's like, I almost took more pride in college just being like, I'm the toughest guy on this team, not even the fastest guy.
Yeah.
And part of that was also listening to guys like at the time, like David Goggins, and who's the Navy SEAL guy, Jocko Willink, which are, I think, good guys to listen to, but you also got to moderate that because you realize David Goggins has run himself literally into the ground.
Yeah. He limps everywhere. He looks terrible when he walks.
Oh yeah. It's detrimental. And kind of going with that mindset. Cause I remember in college, Robert, when I switched to being coached by him, because my first 3 years I was coached by a different point coach, he was like, I know you are tough. Like, I know that I can give you anything and you do it. He's like, I know I can tell you to hit your head against a wall for an hour and you would do it because you're just that tough, but that would do absolutely nothing for you.
Yeah.
And he gave me a quote that I keep it was on a laminated piece of paper by I don't want to say the name because I would absolutely butcher it, the author of The Little Prince, that was perfection is achieved not when there is nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And I remember he told me that, and in that meeting, I looked in the eye and I was like, I have no idea what that means. And he's like, I know you don't. So that's why I'm giving it to you, because you can think about this. And as I thought about it, and as I got older and grew and progressed in the sport, and especially now, I can look at that and be like, man, I was so obsessed with what are things I can add to my already robust routine?
Yeah.
Like, how can I do more? Because doing more just makes you better. And just started realizing as I started peeling away the layers, I'm like, man, it's almost like recovering is like being able to recover, not just like focusing on recovery, but letting yourself recover by focusing on other things.
Yeah.
Is such a big component.
Well, the interesting point is like, so it almost sounds like we're creating a little bit of a dichotomy here, where on one hand, we're saying it's good to be well-rounded and have a balanced life. But then on the other hand, we're saying taking away things is actually beneficial as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And what we really mean by that is that, like, yes, you want your life to be well-balanced. You want your relationships, you want your friendships, you want your work, and you want your hobbies to all sort of have an equal play. And then you'll be a better athlete. But when it comes to training, I feel that so many people, and especially like you were talking about the blue collar mentality with Midwesterners, is you just want to grind. You just want to add. And then there is a time and a place for that. But often, if things aren't clicking, it's not add more salt, it's actually take away more items. And that's why the focus of having a balanced life is critical, because it forces you to not add too many variables in. And so many times with really gifted athletes, it they'll come in and they have a lot of talent, and when they want to get to the next level, they keep adding. And in a sense, it's better for them to get to the line a little underprepared than overprepared and injured. And I think this happens a lot even with the general public. A lot of my patients, they they want to lose the weight, they want to get fit, they're making all these goals for themselves, and then they get injured because they just overreach. And in the end, if you eat right, if you lived right, if you had proper stress, you probably wouldn't need to work as hard exercise wise to injure yourself to get the results that you want. And it's just about being well balanced. And a lot of times you can look at somebody and you can just tell, like, they're stressed. Like, you can see it in their face, you can see it in their energy, and that's not always about like fitness. So I think that's an important concept.
Mm-hmm. And just bouncing off what you're saying with people that come in so motivated to improve in some way in whatever field they're in, if they're looking to lose weight, get healthy, get faster, you have to realize that willpower is a finite well. And that was maybe one of the mistakes I made when I was younger, was just thinking, I have so much willpower that I can just muscle my way through everything.
Yeah.
Like, arbitrary example, but when I was really young and I played Pokemon, I never wanted to learn the type advantages. I'm just like, I'm just going to train my Pokemon until they're so strong that I can just brute strength my way through everything. And it's like, there's no finesse in that. And that was my mindset. Like, it's even as funny as like seeing like when I was 5 years old and playing this game, was my mindset.
Yeah.
And that continued on, where it's just like, I'm just going to brute force my way through training. Yeah. At some point, when you hit an unmovable object, you start fatiguing.
Yeah.
And once that willpower is gone, it's so hard to even start putting your life back together and putting your training back together, because you got to have a little bit to work off of. So I think that was one thing when I left, like going back to when I left Atlanta, I was in such a broken position where I didn't even have anything left to get restarted. So I had to go somewhere to start to convalesce, mentally, physically, emotionally,
literally go back to your roots.
Exactly. Literally. Yeah. And I'm like, I think that was such a cool experience to be able to live with my grandparents for a little while and be in that area. And I think that rejuvenated me to the point where, I'm like, I've got enough fuel to start lighting this fire again, because the fire was entirely out.
Yeah.
Like no sparks, nothing. And that's the risk you run when you say, I'm just going to will my way through this, is because if you run out, like, it's so hard to get even if the ball is rolling a little bit, you can get them again. But when it's stationary, it's just hard to get that rolling again.
Yeah. And I feel like um, I mean, I definitely feel as though a lot of people will stop working out because sometimes they hit an injury or they hit, stressful part in their life and then they just give up on it. And then next thing you know, a couple years go by and they're like, "Oh, I used to run," or, I used to always bike a lot and now I don't anymore. And you're like, "Why?" And they're like, "I don't really know why. I guess there's something that just happened in their life that just made them kind of run off course and they just never got that back." Well, so here we are now, like, you're obviously, in an Olympic year and trying to build up and trying to kinda get your footing with some track races. So where are we right now with fitness and training and all that?
Fitness, like, pretty strong. Unfortunately, have hit a roadblock, which is, honestly, if I'm being realistic, is not a great time, like, or a really terrible time for it to happen because
Yeah.
we're coming close to the Olympics. We're coming close to the trials. Mexican trials are end of June, similar to US
Mhm.
trials. Um, but I will say, despite kind of hitting the snag, I'm in a good mind spot, like a
Yeah.
good mind space. And I think part of that is because, I've been through it before, like where I'm like, this isn't forever, um, and ideally I would love to be in a position where I'm racing and I'm hitting races hard and I'm confident in getting a berth to Paris. But at the same time, I also know that there's not just 2024.
Yeah.
Like there's the next few years. There's world champs every year. The Olympics will return to the US in 2028.
Yeah. LA.
And I'm kind of hitting my prime right now as an athlete. I'll be 28 this year, 32 in 2028. Kind of starting to become a little bit of an old man
Yeah.
since runners age like dogs. but um, but it's something where I'm keeping in mind, hey, it's all right. We learned from Atlanta that getting in the pool, getting on the elliptigo or the elliptical, and just hammering things is not a method that works. So take a step back, take a deep breath. Don't even have to say that this season is like done because of
Right.
this. Just have to be like, okay, let's like foot off the gas for a little bit and then uh analyze and what was like, Clayton's podcast was basically just like pivot
Yeah.
adjust.
Exactly.
And I think this big thing right now is like, all right, well, pivot adjust. What's the best way I can put myself in a position where I could represent Mexico in Paris, but also doing that in a way that's not going to compromise my health to eliminate another potential 4 years of
Yeah.
competing.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't wanna overreach now and then potentially sell yourself for the next couple of years. So we talked a lot about mindset. We talked a lot about sort of the mental hacks and kind of getting through that. So tell me a little bit about some of your eating habits and some of your other training habits and things like that that you feel like you can educate the audience with.
Say one of the biggest things is uh, meat proteins.
Yeah.
So I actually experimented a little bit in 2022 with not a full carnivore diet, but kind of with that Paul Saladino
Yeah, yeah.
uh, animal based. So for those of you who don't know, you're eating red meat, fruit, honey, and raw dairy.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it was great because I realized, man, I've just not eaten a ton of
Yeah.
protein before that, and uh, it also one thing that I've learned recently, just in the past few weeks, I'd say, is it kind of functioned as an elimination diet too.
Yeah.
Because as I've been adding things, excuse me, as I've been adding things back into my diet, I'm realizing some things make me feel good, some things make me feel bad.
Right.
And like one thing, for example, I never realized I think I've got a peanut intolerance, not an
Ah.
allergy, like, but uh, and I've always known, like in the past, like I'd like the airplane peanuts, and I'd
Yeah.
feel like a little ill, just a little feverish, a little fatigued. But I just haven't really had a ton of peanuts in the past couple of years. And then I had a perfect bar a few weeks ago, which is
No,
just
they got it in there.
it's just concentrated peanuts.
Yeah.
And immediately, almost immediately after eating it, I was like, do I have food poisoning?
Hmm.
Like I just started feeling like sluggish, fatigued, uh, like kind of loopy. And like napped for half an hour, walked, like had to get fresh air. And I looked back in hindsight and realized I've always felt pretty like
Yeah.
rough in response to that. And I was notorious in high school and college for throwing up after races. One of my biggest pre races was peanut butter toast. And now that I've cut that out, I haven't thrown up after a race or after a workout.
That's
And
amazing.
I just thought it was like a given of like, oh, it's just going to happen when you work hard.
But I think the key there was that people get sort of freaked out when you talk about carnivore diet, which it's unique. It's a unique experience, but literally what it is that you are eliminating everything else. And then when you add it back in, you genuinely get an idea of how you're reacting to that.
Mm.
And it is a great reset. And it's also kind of goes hand in hand with, you're probably right. You probably weren't consuming enough protein. Um, as a sports physician, I find that my patient outcomes are markedly better when I advise people to actually ramp up their protein. Go a gram to a gram and a half per pound of body weight. And once people do that, get to that level, I mean, stress fractures go away, tendon issues go away. I mean, it's pretty wild how things like that will improve. And despite what the media makes us think is that we're such a meat driven culture, we're actually not. We actually don't have enough protein typically in our diet because everything is so processed carb driven that, like, once you really break it down, like, you're not getting anywhere near the amount you should.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing when I was in Mexico, and it was encouraging to preface this, hearing Clayton say, oh yeah, I eat fast food all the time. It's hilarious because this guy's a bronze medalist and
Yeah.
obviously an incredible athlete. And that's not what you think. You think people are usually pretty anal about their diet when they
Yeah.
hit these high levels. When I was in Mexico, I told you before the pod, I was door dashing every day. Either sometimes it was gringas, which are it's Mexican street food. It's tortillas with Oaxacan queso and I can't remember what kind of meat. I want to say it's whatever's on the spit. But it's basically just cheese and meat, not like nothing else. Like you think like, oh, this is bad for you, something like that. But when you're running super high mileage, when you're working out, when you're exercising, when you're doing what you got to do, it's just fuel. Like you got to fuel the fire. And one concept I learned in the past couple of years, I was definitely under fueling for a long time, for the majority of my career. And I'd say in the past 2 years, I've really adopted that Nick Symmonds mindset of, if the furnace is burning hot enough, anything is fuel. And the other one is, I would rather be overfueled than underfueled.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to some of the modifications with diet that you were making, is that if you focus on meat and focus on fruit, those are good, healthy sources of fueling. And if you focus on like bars and like processed food, those are not good, healthy servings. So you're not going to get as much nutrients out of those. So then when you eat them, it's basically your body's going to crave more. So you're going to get more essential junk, and then all these, additives that you don't really need. But there's no ingredients list to like berries or steak.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, in the end, you're really just getting all the nutrients from those macros.
It's funny because like my current teammates just know me as like a little bit granola in that way, like kind of crunchy. Where one of my teammates' girlfriends was visiting us in Flag, and she was like, whose almond milk is this? And like, it's like, oh, maybe Ryan's. And one of my other teammates, Alec, was like, no, absolutely not Ryan's. And like, because the entire time I'm there, I'm buying my raw milk, because whenever I can get raw milk, I get it. And I'm like, and I just hear I just get like, did someone just say almond milk and my name in the same sentence? But yeah, to your point, it's like you look at that ingredients list where it's like all these additives, preservatives, emulsifiers, whatever, they're in these manufactured products. Whereas then you look at the ingredients of milk.
Yeah, just raw milk. Yep. So okay, so that's it. That's a great one. I like that. So I'm glad you mentioned that. What are some other things that you're sort of tinkering with and making your lifestyle better?
Well, one thing that is always difficult is sleep. I've always had a problem with that. And I don't like the idea of using sleep meds.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly just, you don't know how it's going to react to whatever. I actually, maybe even beyond that, I don't want to become reliant on sleep meds.
Yeah, there you go.
Probably the big thing. So I've always experimented with like melatonin, time away from screens, and this so much connects back to like earlier. I think the best medicine for sleep is just being satisfied.
Yeah.
And I'll be totally transparent. Like I have chronic depression that definitely results in insomnia.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, like, same thing. Like I think that medication is a great thing, but I've never really wanted to take it because, again, I don't want to become reliant on that.
Did you find that was improved by going to carnivore?
A little bit, yeah, actually. I mean, I think I was in such a down period that anything would have helped.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I think going to bed not feeling hungry and not feeling
Yeah.
like it's like my body's clearly craving more of something, um, was a big thing. So that, and again, connecting to earlier, having things outside of running, like
Yeah.
when I've got other projects going on, if I have some way to work, or I, like for a while I was doing like writing some articles for a job that a friend put me onto, and it's nice to make some cash, but it was also, man, I can sit down for a couple hours and
Yeah.
write, edit, rewrite,
Think about something else, you know?
Mhm. So I think like like the best medication, in my opinion, in my experience, rather, is balance.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So what else are you doing to kind of help us sleep?
Um, Man, that's pretty. I don't know
Like,
if I should mention the.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I'm. I will preface. This is legal in the states that I live in, and the states that I've lived in. But sleep gummies
Yeah.
that have THC, so marijuana, weed, the devil's lettuce. um, uh, they. I've never slept as well as I have when I have a gummy,
Yeah.
um, and it really is wild to me because for I grew up in Ohio, so I grew up thinking like this is the gateway drug,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think certainly you can abuse it
Yeah.
just like anything else, but especially in this context where, say, on mornings I have a hard workout coffee, like that's actually the only time I have caffeine is on hard workouts or races,
Yeah.
um, just because I'm so sensitive to it. I could have it at 6 a.m. and then be rolling around at midnight because of it. Uh, if I pop a gummy,
And that has to do with like how fast you're metabolizing the actual caffeine. Some people metabolize it really, really slow. That would be you.
uh,
And some people's half-life is longer than 10 hours. So 10 hours is actually the half-life of caffeine.
huh,
So, but some people actually have it longer. That's a bell curve. So, in his situation, your half-life might be 14, 15 hours.
yeah. Well, that makes sense because I've always had people be like, well, "How does it affect you? It shouldn't like be in your
Yeah.
system that long." And I'm like, I
I
don't
don't
know, but
know.
it
It
does.
just does. Yeah.
But one thing I've experimented with is pop a gummy and I'm out.
Yeah.
Um, and the tough thing is obviously is that it is still considered a performance enhancing drug,
Yeah.
uh, where it really just shouldn't be. Um,
Right.
and
I know we were talking earlier about the whole Shikari situation a couple years
mm,
ago and all that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's important to bring up topics like this, and so that we can air it out and just kind of talk about things that I think a lot of people are questioning and wondering about. But I know the NFL is definitely looking at modifying that. I mean, if you live in chronic pain, I think it's important for that to be a component of some people's health. I mean, it's better that they try things like that versus any other medications that could be addicting. So,
yeah.
that's another thing.
Well, and that's like, well, kind of even going back to like ingredients lists. It's a naturally derived
Dude, this is
ingredient.
this is the biggest thing that I don't think people understand. Other plants have endocannabinoid receptors, and most animals and humans in every single cell of their body have endocannabinoid receptors.
For the
And you're
kids that
probably
don't
like,
know,
what the heck
what
does
is
that
that?
mean? An
Okay.
endocannabinoid receptor is the receptor that takes in CBD and THC. So basically, there's over like 300 different molecules that are associated with the endocannabinoid. It's the broader spectrum with chemistry. So CBDA, CBDC, all these different CBDs are actually go into the endocannabinoid receptors, and so does THC. It just happens to be one of those variables. But since every cell in your body has receptors for it, it's meant to be in your body. Like, why would we create every single cell of our body to have receptors if it was not meant to be in our system? Like, I granted some people react different than others to actually THC, but at least CBD and some of those other molecules are or should be consistently in our diet because it's clearly meant to be there. I don't know. It's crazy.
Well, and I'm not an expert on this, but I've heard like the history of like the process of making it illegal was more because like the cotton industry didn't want the hemp industry to start
Yeah.
taking out because hemp was a stronger, more reliable fabric,
Mhm.
and obviously that's kind of I won't jump too far into the rabbit hole, but like that is a reality in the U.S.
Yeah.
is that if you're in a position where you have money and influence, you don't want to
Yeah.
give up your money and influence.
Well, and that's the other thing too is that at one point, one of the blue book laws in the country in the United States was that it was illegal to actually not grow hemp if you owned a property because it was so vital to the community. And this is like early in the 1700s and stuff, but it's like definitely like it's meant to be around.
Well, and if you want to go that far, I mean, Thomas Jefferson, one of our founding fathers, the father of the Declaration. I mean, that guy, I mean, he clearly enjoyed his cannabis. So, I mean, probably maybe the second smartest president behind John Adams.
Yeah. You're not just saying that because of the last name.
Not just saying that because of the last name. I mean, you know, probably no relation there, but yeah, that's I'd say probably consensus among historians is that John Adams probably had the highest IQ of any president.
And that's awesome. I actually didn't know that. Well, let's pivot even more here. So walk me through kind of your race day strategies. And so, you talked earlier about some of the pre-race things that maybe didn't work for you. So what's your strategy now? So what are some of the things that you use and go to?
So the biggest game changer that I had kind of mid-college was just a big breakfast. It really is the most important meal of the day. Having things like eggs, yogurt, these protein, fat, heavy things, you just look at it as fuel sources. I mean, shoot, before the Guardian Mile last year, which was my first race back in the US since 2021, I had steak and eggs. And really not shying away from that. And I think the prevailing thought has been up until recently, hopefully this is starting to change a little bit, eat light. Because you want to have your stomach light, you want to feel light. And it's like, no, when you eat light, imagine saying in a NASCAR race, oh, the gas weighs a lot, so let's keep the gas light.
Yeah, it's definitely a non-negotiable for sure. Yeah, and the thing about that's different is that when you're in a faster event like the 800-mile 5K, you definitely need to have that fuel readily available, and that's the critical thing. Versus some other events where you might be out there for 2-3 hours of running where anything could be, if it's in you've got a longer period, it can jar and kind of become a little bit more of an issue. But definitely some of the shorter races, like that's for sure a great idea.
What would you eat before marathons?
So for me, I'm basically, I eat light. But what I basically do is I like have a bar of sorts, just like a typical like pro bar or something, and then a banana. But the reason why I do that is that in the marathon, and that's mainly the events that I'm running, is that in the marathon, I am fat adapted. And so I want the large portion of my race early on to be where I'm pulling from fat stores. And that requires like kind of skimping a little bit on your intake of the food that day so that your brain sort of like needs to rely a little bit more on your fuel sourcing. And then so that way I can stave off my carbs for later in the race. That's a controversial topic. I'm hoping to have some people on the podcast shortly that will kind of flesh this out a little bit more, but that always felt natural to me. That's kind of how I trained. I think when I'm running a 5K or a little bit shorter race than a marathon, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus a little bit more on what you're talking about. I'm going to have more of a fueling source. I'm going to want the fuel to be there that day. But again, it comes down to preference. Some people want to feel light. And you clearly you want to get it in there and just feel like content.
I think part of that is that I will never feel light no matter what I do. Always been on the kind of denser side of runners. Yeah. So
and that could be part of it, right? And that could be why you adapt that way. I mean, you are a very dense, muscular, strong runner, and maybe that's why you feel better having those sources. Because you are turning over muscle more so than somebody who's more bird-like me. I'm a lighter, frailer kind of frame. So that's kind of an interesting thought there. So we're kind of rounding third a little bit here on the podcast. So any last parting words or ideas you kind of want the listeners to have?
I guess just in summation, finding your balance, finding things outside of running, that's just so essential and so important. And whatever you do, whatever kind of pursuit you do, whether it's running, a professional pursuit, a hobby, and like you grow, you learn, and you go through bad times, and it's just inevitable. You're gonna have those times, and rather than just kicking it away and being like, well, I guess that's that, and I've been at that point before. I mean, when I saw Leo a year and a half ago, I was at a point where I was like, I don't even know if I can do this anymore.
Yeah.
I think just when you get to that point, just realize like it's going to get better. And the more that you go through, the more you grow. And the more, like, now that I'm going through, kind of a small injury, a little nag, like, I can keep my head and be like, all right, it's all right. I've been through this before. And this doesn't mean this is the end. This is just pivot and just move forward. And I think that's just the big thing. It's just like, it's cheesy. It's oversaid. It's like, don't give up, just because, like, the first sign of trouble, just work your way through it. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
I mean, every single sports story we literally hear of, Brady and Jordan, and there's more. It's such a great story because of what they went through. If it's smooth and paved, that's pretty rare. The LeBron James's story of the world is pretty rare. Not that his childhood was smooth and paved, but from basically his high school through the early professional career and everything. I mean, he really just kind of had it just pretty smooth. He didn't really lose a lot per se until, like he was goated pretty early on in his career. And I think that's kind of the rare thing. But most athletes, professional athletes, have setbacks, and it's those setbacks that really make it worthwhile.
And actually, if there's one more point I can put down, just because you come back from those setbacks doesn't mean it's just smooth sailing from there.
Yeah.
Also, like, one thing we didn't mention, to my own horn a little bit, add my cred, like, I did end up winning 2 national titles in Mexico last year at the national championship.
Congrats.
Thank you. I was, I look back and I'm more proud now than I was then, because at the time I was still working through things. But even though I've achieved that and was able to sign a new contract, it's still been pretty rough waters. And I'm hoping at some point here there will be some smooth waters, and I know there will be, like, statistically. But just because you have, like, those, like, hits of success, like, just use those to fuel you to get you to the next one, because it'll still be hard.
Another little lateral step here. What's your creative outlet? What do you do for creativity?
That's a great question. I like to read. The last book that I read was Brothers Karamazov. It took me about 2 years, so don't be too impressed. I read. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a big movies guy, like, big movie buff. I like to write reviews for movies.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the other thing that's, I don't know if it's creative so much as just, like, a little bit of, like, brain rot, kind of, you need to veg out. Like, I played RuneScape since I was, like, in 3rd grade. So,
yeah, there you go.
On and off, but I actually just re-downloaded it. So now,
it's coming back.
Yeah.
I asked that because I think this is a component that's not discussed enough about people and with regards to their general sentiment about how they're feeling in life is, we were talking earlier about depression and things like that. Is like, you have to have a creative outlet. Like, we were human beings. We're meant to create, and everybody's got to find their outlet in that source. And it's like, you can't work yourself to death. You can't out fitness yourself to death. You basically have to have a nice creative outlet as well. Mine is, starting this podcast and, writing and doing other stuff like that. So I'm finding a whole new part of me, because I was always Mr. Grinder guy and Mr. Blue Collar, always wanting to put the hours in. And man, it's important. And that's a component that I've never really have given myself the right to kind of lean more into that. And I find myself so many times with patients when I'm walking through their care to, like, just ask that question, because most people don't think about it. Like, what do they do from a creative aspect? Like, are they creating? Are they drawing? Are they painting? Are they writing? Or are they creating at their work? Do they feel validated there? And most people don't. And I think it's vitally important that they find that component. So that'll be my parting words there. And so thanks again, Ryan, for coming on the podcast and enlightening our audience. So with regards to this, so we're at the close here. So make sure to like and subscribe, give us some reviews, give us some feedback, and also stay tuned each week for each episode. Thanks again. Thanks for joining.